Thank you to Skookum for having me. I really appreciate this. I've been looking forward to this. Honestly, it's not that often that I get to address a room full of folks with your background who do what you do. I mean, in state government, we just don't. I spend a lot of time in church basements, you know, just like talking to anybody who will come and talk. So this is a real treat. I have only been in elected office for a little over 2 years and a couple of months. It's my first elected office. So what happened was, 2 years and a couple of months ago, don't know if you all remember, but the mayor of Charlotte got arrested. And I was a prosecutor, and one day, this defense attorney came up to me at the end of court, and he said, "Jeff, did you hear the news?" I said, "No." He said, "The mayor of Charlotte just got arrested by the FBI." And I said, "Well, that's amazing. And I don't think it'll ever have anything to do with me, so I'm just going to go on about my day." Honestly, at that moment, I thought that that was as relevant to me as it was to any of you. But what happened was we needed a new mayor. And they wanted to kind of reach from outside city council for the new mayor. So the person they picked was my state senator, Dan Clodfelter. Dan Clodfelter was known for, among other things, being a man of utmost integrity. So in that moment of kind of political darkness, the city reached out to him, and he left the state Senate and became our mayor. And then we needed a new Dan Clodfelter in the Senate, and they picked me to become the new Dan Clodfelter. So I had to quit my job. You're not allowed to be a criminal prosecutor and an elected official at the same time in North Carolina. It's a violation of our state constitution. So I quit that job, and I went to the state Senate, and I've been there for about the last 2 years. And one of the things that I just want to report to you as a very general observation about the General Assembly for North Carolina is it's an elderly population. Distinguished but elderly. I'm about half the average age. So I'm 33 years old. I get that I should be young to be in the General Assembly, but to be half the average age is something else. We got plenty of folks there in their 80s, and God love them. But it's basically a retirement community that runs the state. So when I get the opportunity to talk about technology and things that are going to happen in the future, I seize it because we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about things like that. So what I want to do is just share with you 3 pieces of the future, 3 emerging trends, and you're going to be familiar with all of these just because you're all well-read, you live in this town, these things affect you, but hopefully we can get a little bit below the surface on some of these things. This is not a complete picture of all of the major trends that are going to affect our community and our lives and our professions going forward, but there are 3 emerging trends that are going to have some intersection with state government. We are going to have to make some major decisions. So the first one is autonomous vehicles, driverless cars. It's going to be a big deal. And just when I say that in the General Assembly, like that lands with these guys. Like, wait a second. You're telling me that you'll have people in a car who won't be holding the steering wheel? I don't believe it. Never. Right? They don't understand that not only is this inevitable, but it's going to happen very quickly. So the first step is partial autonomous vehicles. And the steps there, the features that we're going to be seeing shortly included in vehicles will be single lane highway autopilot that won't involve changing lanes. And what was the second feature? Oh, traffic jam autopilot. So within the next couple of years, they're going to roll these out. There are no technological hurdles with respect to those features. The hurdles are only regulatory and somewhat insurance-based. It's going to cost about $4,000 when you get your next car to have that option of single lane highway autopilot. And they're going to use that generation of partial autonomous vehicles and that feature upgrade to scale up in order to do the next generation, which is going to be multi-lane highway autopilot, so lane changing. And the plan there is to use these sensors that have a large percentage of overlap with respect to these different features. So the good news is they're going to be able to scale up relatively quickly because the sensors are going to be multi-purpose. So this is happening now. These are in production more or less at some stage now. We're going to see widespread adoption of partially autonomous vehicles within the next 5 years. And after that, it never stops. It's a trend that permanently accelerates and is expected to accelerate exponentially. Within the next 20 years, the conventional estimate is that 10% of the cars on the road by 2035 will be fully autonomous. 10% of the cars on the road. That'll be 40 million vehicles. It'll be roughly an $80 billion market each year. But there is good reason to think that that estimate is wrong, and that this is actually going to happen more quickly than people expect. That estimate is based on previous adoptions of incremental upgrades in vehicles like anti-lock brakes and airbags. And if you look at how quickly those were adopted, frankly, it wasn't that fast because it cost you some extra money. And those are the models that they're extrapolating from to figure out how quickly autonomous vehicles are going to arrive. But the problem is, it's not an apples to apples comparison, because with autonomous vehicles, there are several, not incremental changes and upgrades that occur, but categorical upgrades that occur with respect to safety, with respect to time saved, with respect to convenience. There are going to be a number of high wealth earners who will pay whatever it takes to have autonomous vehicles as quickly as possible that will allow us to scale up the manufacturing more quickly. There will be a huge push from the commercial trucking industry, enormous amount of money pouring into this area, which I think is going to lead to acceleration more quickly than we expect. I think we're going to have autonomous vehicles, I don't know, could be twice as fast as the conventional models expect. We have, just in terms of how you value your time, if you value your time at $10 an hour, which I imagine no one in this room does, just from looking, we're on the 15th floor of a pretty nice building. But if you just value your time at $10 an hour, then these features will cost, then that costs you, if you save 1 hour a day of not having to drive, that's $3,500 a year, about $20,000 over 5 years. That's saving you 1 hour a day. So if having an autonomous vehicle can save you 1 hour a day, half hour there, half hour back, well, you should be willing to fork over about 20 grand for that feature. It's not going to cost 20 grand. It's going to cost significantly less than that, which is going to lead to rapid adoption. For the trucking industry, the cost for transporting goods, a third of the cost goes to the truck driver. On top of that, there's an enormous deficit in truck drivers. Don't know if you know that, but by the year 2020, we're going to have about 100,000 fewer truck drivers than we really need. So at the same time that the trucking industry has an enormous financial incentive to swap out their truck drivers for an autonomous version, they're going to have an enormous shortfall in workers. That's why they're making major investments now. Daimler is making major investments now. It's going to scale up the technology. We'll see more rapid adoption. The taxi service industry, those vehicles have about a 5% utilization rate right now. If they can take that to 50% or 60%, their profit margin, it goes through the roof. They have an enormous incentive to do this. That's why they're purchasing Cruise Automation, software company, recently purchased in order to facilitate that kind of adoption. So maybe the conventional prediction is right, and autonomous vehicles are inevitable, but it's going to be relatively slow. It's going to pick up about 20 years from now. But I think there's a good chance that they're wrong. And if they're wrong, and this is going to happen much more quickly than anyone anticipates, then we need to be real about the implications, because the implications are far-reaching. This is a tidal wave that hits and has countless impacts that, frankly, we're not really thinking about right now. So let's just go through what a few of those may be. First of all, mass transit. Let's talk about light rail. How many people here have used the light rail? That's just about everybody, and that's fantastic. It was built for you. 70% of the people who used the light rail had never used mass transit before. Ridership has doubled their expectations. They were hoping in the first year that they would get about 8,000, 9,000, get about 20,000, and they've stayed at about 20,000. And you can see the catalytic effects that it's had on business development in that area. So by every measure, that light rail has been an enormous success. We're real excited about the next leg of the light rail that's going up to UNC Charlotte. If for no other reason then, it's going to bring a lot of UNC Charlotte students right into Uptown. so they can go to the various professional athletic events that we have. And UNC Charlotte, I don't know if you know this, it is exploding in student growth. 50% of the growth for the entire UNC system, all 16 schools. Over the last 5 years, 50% of the growth for that system has come from that school. So to connect all of that growth to easy access to uptown is going to be huge. But let's get back to driverless cars, because light rail ain't cheap. The South Line, the one that exists right now, that costs about $500 million. The North Line going out to UNC Charlotte, that's a little over $1 billion. And now you hear people talking a lot about we should really have high-speed rail to various places, like Europe. Europe has all these examples of high-speed rail, has high ridership, appears to be worth it. Every one of those high-speed rail lines, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars. And right now, a lot of that looks like a good investment. But that's not factoring in the tidal wave that could be coming in transportation. Is it a good idea to continue to put down billions of dollars for these rail systems when there's a chance they could be obsolete in 25, 35 years? Because these are 50-year investments that we're making on your behalf with your tax dollars in the hope that you will use them. If you use them, they're worth it. If the ridership numbers stay high, we made a good decision with your money. But if you opt in 20 years for driverless shuttles that will stop by your door and pick you up when you hit a button, then we made a bad decision with your money. And nobody knows yet whether or not, or to what extent we need to factor in the rise of autonomous vehicles with our mass transit investments. But I can tell you one thing, we need to consider it a bigger factor than it's been. The original light rail that exists going down to South Boulevard, that came along in 1999. I can assure you there was no consideration made in 1999 about the rise of driverless vehicles. The new line going up to UNC Charlotte, that came around in 2012. I don't know if they made any significant inclusion of the possibility of driverless vehicles, but I can tell you it probably was not a major topic of conversation. For every subsequent project now, this has to be a major topic of conversation. And look, in state government, we're just not really primed to be on the leading edge of this kind of thing. With new technology that's going to come and reshape the landscape, your representatives in state government are good people, but they're not exactly technologists or futurists, and neither am I. The point of my having this little discussion is just to tell you this is something that I'm really concerned about. So we filed a bill in your state government in Raleigh to study driverless vehicles, how fast they might be adopted, what the consequences might be. And here's what the bill became. So they didn't pass that bill. What they did was they swapped it out with another bill, which is very common practice. A bill on, dogs can become a bill on gun control at the snap of somebody's fingers. That's an actual example. So here's what the bill to study driverless vehicles became. An act to require appraisal management companies to compensate appraisers in compliance with federal law and to allow federal appellate judges to perform marriage ceremonies. Okay, sounds fine to me, but sounds somewhat less important than getting our hands around this economic tidal wave that could be hitting North Carolina within the next 10, 15, 20 years, and which will take us that long to prepare for. So that's kind of the piece that I wanted to talk about when it comes to driverless vehicles. Enormous opportunities there. There's a good chance that insurance rates are going to drop. Then again, insurance companies may shrink as a result. There are enormous financial implications to that because insurance companies themselves, as a lot of you know, are major financial players. So the dominoes on this just don't end. And if we're going to be responsible stewards of your tax dollars, it's something we have to start treating seriously, which requires us to think about the future, which is deeply painful for a lot of your representatives. So now let's talk about robots. This one is even more politically fraught. And it involves, the catalyst for this discussion is the amount of reshoring that we're seeing from Asia. So, 1990s, companies started leaving here for Asia, for China. Early 2000s, that trend accelerates significantly. We see major job loss to China. This is a story with which everyone in this room is familiar. Last 5 years, to a certain extent, and with certain industries, you see a reversal of that trend, which excites a lot of people here. Certainly a lot of politicians who want to bring some good news home and say, hey, these manufacturing jobs that were the core of the middle class, some of them are coming home. There's reason for hope. So part of the reason why there has been some reshoring and that trend continues is because costs in China have just gotten more expensive. Wages have gone up, as you would expect. The price of land in coastal China has become significantly more expensive than the price of land in coastal United States of America. That's how quickly the development there has occurred. Coupled with the rise of robotics and the exponential increase with which robots are being used in industrialization, there has been a 20% average increase in the purchase of robots for the purpose of industrial manufacturing over the last 4 years. On average, 20% increase. That is exponential growth. Hundreds of thousands of robots are now being purchased every single year for the purpose of industrial manufacturing. Now, our opportunity for manufacturing growth here in North Carolina and more broadly in the United States is a specific subsector of manufacturing called high mix, low yield manufacturing. And here's the idea. The idea is we're going to continue to lose to China with enormous high volume manufacturing. So the microphone that goes in my iPhone, they need to make, I don't know, 100 million of them, 200 million of them. That's not going to happen here. No chance. That's going to be high volume, low mix, because they're all identical. Asia gets that. But our opportunity is in high mix, with a high variation rate among manufactured goods. Whirlpool is a classic example. How many different types of refrigerators do you think Whirlpool makes? I heard 3, 40, 200 is a little high. It's over 100, so like 107 different types of refrigerators that Whirlpool makes. Well, 30 years ago, it was a fifth. Everybody wants their own different type of refrigerator now, and Whirlpool would love to accommodate that demand for individualization and specification. The way you do that is high mix manufacturing. North Carolina and the United States is uniquely positioned to accommodate that type of manufacturing. It involves a lot of robotics. It involves extremely high-skilled workers. Well, we have those two things. Now, believe me, China understands this, and they're pursuing it as quickly as possible. Their private sector bought more robots than we did last year. China was 1, I think US was number 2, Germany and Korea were in there as well. So kind of who you would expect. It's not a big secret that these are going to be an integral part of future manufacturing. But we do have a unique advantage with respect to this high mix area. Here's the politically difficult part. What's going to happen is we have an increasing share of robots in manufacturing. We have a decreasing share of human interaction and necessity, which means displaced workers. With respect to autonomous vehicles, you got the same problem there. 3 million truck drivers stand to lose their jobs. 3 million truck drivers will lose their jobs. It is only a matter of time. With the use of robotics in manufacturing, they expect 5 million job losses within the next 4 years. And does anybody think that's the end? That's the beginning. Very few politicians are willing to just say to you what I just said because it's so painful for so many people. Are there incidental opportunities that exist? Of course, we want more manufacturing here. But what year in United States history, in what year did we produce the most quantity of manufactured goods ever? What was our record year for manufactured goods? I heard 1954. 1945 is a good bet. It was last year. Last year by far. And yet, employment in the manufacturing industry continues to go down because this robot thing ain't new. Right? This has been a long time coming, but now it's accelerating at an exponential rate. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on the sectors of our population that are already under the most pressure. So there are going to be technological impacts for that, certainly. There are going to be economic consequences as far as tonnage of manufactured goods. There are going to be major political consequences. If we start displacing the number of workers that it appears we are going to displace. So as far as state government, what's our role there? Because frankly, this is going to happen with or without us. The world purchased 300,000 robots last year for manufacturing. The United States government did not. This is a trend that is larger than any state government, any national government. So what can state and national governments do? What is their responsibility? Well, at the very least, it's probably our responsibility to make sure that we have the highest trained workers that we can possibly afford and possibly produce. We need to make sure that folks are going to be able to switch careers because everyone's going to have 7, 8, 9 careers for the most part. The largest share of the population is going to have to shift careers several times. They need to be able to do that. That requires major investment from the state. We've got a great community college system in North Carolina. We got 58 community colleges. Other states have adopted what North Carolina started a long time ago, what we were the vanguard in a long time ago with community colleges, and they're trying to surpass us. So Tennessee has gone to zero tuition for their community colleges as a way to try and get ahead of the curve and just tell everybody, look, you are going to have to retrain. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. That requires a certain commitment of resources that right now, I don't mind telling you, the state of North Carolina is probably not willing to make. They probably don't fully appreciate just how necessary it is going to be and how plain and straightforward we are going to have to be with a lot of folks that this is in your future. The apprenticeship model in Europe has proven wildly successful for them. Businesses are tightly integrated with what we would call high schools in Europe, and they pay students to go to school, and then they pay them to come and work at that business and learn the vocation, learn the skill during the weekend. We don't do that so much in the United States. We're going to have to. The entry-level jobs that we want to create are just going to require more technical skill from our students. We have a lot of European companies here in Charlotte. We've got a lot in Steel Creek, which is the southern part of my district. A lot of German companies, some Swiss companies. And they've decided that because the state of North Carolina is basically nowhere in encouraging apprenticeships, that they would just take the lead. So we have companies, German companies in Steel Creek that are paying high school students who go to Olympic $9 an hour to sit in class. You just go to school, you do good work, you come to us on the weekends, you come to us during the summer, and when you graduate, you got a $45,000 job, $45,000 a year job. That's outstanding. And that is the trend. And the state of North Carolina is probably going to have to get behind that in some major way. It needs to be a big conversation that hasn't been had. So the worst case scenario with respect to these mega trends arriving is that they arrive and we haven't prepared. It's globalization. Very predictable, right? Even in the 1980s, it was very clear what the trend was going to be. And your leaders did not prepare you. They did not prepare North Carolina. We have lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in all of our core industries. We just got smacked by it because there was no real strategy, because folks didn't want to level with you about how difficult things were about to become. Well, these are two clear trends that we can see coming. So it's time to get real. It's time to level with people. We're going to have to commit some resources to these areas to make sure that our population can compete and continue to put food on the table for their family, because that's ultimately what will be at stake. Last thing, and this is all good news, this last one, is about Charlotte and the role that we're going to have to play in the global economy with respect to logistics. A lot of people who don't know that much about Charlotte, if they know one thing, we're a banking town. We're the second largest financial center in the country. That's the catchphrase that's most commonly associated with our core industry, our city's economy, finance. What people don't know is that Charlotte is basically in a huge inland port. If you think about Charlotte, it's way too big a city to not be on the coast. Every other city our size, except for Atlanta, on the East Coast, is on the coast. They started as a port city. Charlotte and Atlanta have been able to grow to this size by basically becoming an inland port. So Charlotte, we've got a great interstate highway situation going on. We got a lot of interstate highways, a hugely disproportionate share relative to the rest of the state. Great connectivity with our highway system. We've got a great rail system here. You can connect to 23 other states by rail from Charlotte. And then we've got this airport. And before I joined the state senate, even though I knew Charlotte and I knew the airport, I really had no idea how important that airport actually is to our economy as a city. That airport is the most valuable economic asset in the left half of the state of North Carolina. And it's positioned right next to the new intermodal yard, which is the fancy name for the new rail yard that they are now expanding. It's the largest intermodal station in the country that's placed right between two active runways. And there's this beautiful synergistic effect that occurs and will continue to occur. And with the interstate highways, it's the reason why we have 320 trucking companies here just in Charlotte. We are going to continue to move the world's goods at an accelerating rate. And if we can get a piece of that, we will always be relevant to the global economy. And we should be. I mean, our leaders in generations past did a great job with respect to that part of city planning. They have positioned us very well to compete in the game of the century. When the gold rush was happening and everybody was going to California to look for gold, Levi said, forget gold, I'm going to sell them blue jeans. And that's what Charlotte's in a position to do. As everybody wants to ship goods to each other, Charlotte is in a position to facilitate that. And it's really an endless growth runway for our city with respect to that industry. We are going to acquire a reputation as a global logistics hub over the next 10, 20 years. And that is going to be, we will reap benefits from that for generations. There's no reason to see an end to the growth that occurs as a result of acquiring that brand for our city. That's the good news. But in order to really participate in that, not only do you have to be in the Charlotte metropolitan region, but you have to have a profession that participates in the global economy, which not enough people do. So we all know that 99.9% of the world's consumption exists outside of North Carolina, right? That's obvious. All the world's consumers, for the most part, are outside North Carolina. 93% of our state's economy, all the dollars in the state, is internally produced. So only 7% of our state's economy comes from that 99% outside of our borders. Most of the money that we make is being passed from Charlotte to Wilmington to Salisbury back to Charlotte. Internally produced. We have to draw in more dollars. That's the way that you raise all boats in this sea, is by bringing in more dollars, by participating in the global economy. Hopefully we can figure out some ways to do that. It's going to require a lot of foresight, a lot of difficult conversations. The idea that we can bring back all these jobs that we've lost and go to all these small towns and say, don't worry, we're going to bring back all of these jobs, that is ludicrous. And the politicians who say that, and they are legion, are misleading all of those people. Instead of spending the time that we need to spend discussing issues like this that are going to shape the next 20 years. There are a lot of opportunities here if we can get ahead of this, the same way the people who built this city got ahead of the logistics trend 20, 30 years ago. A lot of great opportunities out there. I hope you all get involved in politics, at least some of you, so you can help us out and upgrade and modernize the political conversations that we're having. I don't know if you've noticed, but some of our political conversations are a little outdated. Some of the issues that we're discussing even this week resemble a distant past for our state and for our country, and one of the worst parts of our distant past. Hopefully we can put that to bed. Thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. Do we typically do questions? Okay. Well, I want to stay with tradition. All right. What are your questions? And if you want, ask about anything. You know, it doesn't have to be. I've basically told you everything I know about robotics, so don't ask about that.
So you talked about the distribution that we have, especially on the roads. You know, obviously with that, the Panama Canal expansion, with shipping coming to the East Coast. With that said, how could we lock ourselves down for 50 years?
Is this a toll road question?
Yeah, well, it's a toll road question, but I never even thought about it in the perspective that you presented. The fact that we're talking about a major increase of shipping distribution, autonomous vehicles, and we're locking ourselves down in 2 lanes of north-south transportation.
Yep, you're right. That toll road is a bad deal.
Well, besides the obvious,
Yeah.
I mean,
No, you're right, because, I mean,
Not only is that the fastest growing part of the state for residential purposes, but it is one of the export pipelines that we have. That's just one of the ways that we're going to get goods from us to Norfolk. So we've got 2 ports in North Carolina, and neither of them are exactly what they could be. It would be great if we had one kind of world-class port. Instead, we've got 2 kind of mid-level ports, and it's because, you know, when they were created, you know, we weren't thinking about the Panama Canal. So Charleston, the port of Charleston, is basically Charlotte's home port. You can get goods from here to there actually a little more quickly than you can get goods from here to Wilmington. And then Norfolk is an even larger port. So if goods are coming from Charlotte to Norfolk, they'll be on that toll road for the next 50 years, which is terrible. So
without the ability to expand because of contractual.
Well, you can expand, but you have to pay a contractual penalty for expanding, and it's unclear what that penalty would be because it's relative to the volume on the road when you expand. So the idea of having toll roads, you know, I tell people there are toll roads and then there are bad toll roads, or worse toll roads, I guess. This is like worst case scenario, where the money that we're giving isn't even going into the North Carolina Department of Transportation for the purpose of creating more roads. We're going to have other toll roads in Mecklenburg. Those are owned and operated by NCDOT. So the money is at least going back into our roads. All of this money is leaving our shores. That's not doing us any favors. And then the terms of the contract were so restrictive and so long-term that it just, I mean, they didn't read the deal.
So what do we do?
It's going to happen because the governor refused to cancel it. So thank the governor. I mean, it's completely within his power. He runs the DOT. They work for him. At the very least, he could have pushed to renegotiate the deal. What I would have done as governor is I would have said, hey, Sintra, it's Jeff. Bad news. Everybody hates the toll road. I know it's $600 million for you, and it's going to cost us maybe $50, $60 million to cancel, but I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to schedule the vote for Friday. But if you want to talk about it, maybe we can talk on Thursday. It's $60 million to us. It's $600 million to them. What do you think they do after they get that phone call from the governor? What do you want? How do we save this? And if our $600 million deal becomes a $650 million deal because we have to purchase our way out of some of the worst aspects of that contract, so be it. That's worth it. But we didn't see that. We saw nothing. No effort to even forget cancellation, no effort to even renegotiate the worst elements of the contract. And I'm at a loss to explain to you why that occurred. I'm genuinely at a loss.
yes.
But coming out of Charleston, you go 26 and then you go 77. 77's okay, but except that I was on a few hours, 5 hours yesterday on a hour and a half drive. But 26, South Carolina's not putting any money in any roads, and it's deteriorating. So at least you have the privatization that'll keep a high-quality road probably in existence. I just wanted to point that out.
Well, South Carolina has been behind the curve on paved roads and road expansion for a long time. And that was a North Carolina slight. Like they actually they've got a lot of unpaved roads. And, you know, I love South Carolina, not a South Carolina. Hey, South Carolina is crushing us when it comes to business recruitment because Nikki Haley is the quarterback on the economic development team, and she is highly aggressive. She has a strategic long-term approach, and she works the phones. And frankly, our folks, our governor could learn a lot from Nikki Haley and how aggressive she is with recruiting businesses. But yeah, we've got 80,000 miles of state-maintained road in North Carolina, which is more than any other state in the country. Is because during the Great Depression, all of the localities that are supposed to take care of roads typically said we can't do it anymore, and the state of North Carolina said, okay, we'll do it. So we made that commitment about 100 years ago, and that has paid enormous dividends. That plus the university system is the reason why North Carolina and South Carolina are different, because we made those two major investments, and they decided we're just going to keep taxes as low as we possibly can and not make these investments. Yes.
So getting back to the autonomous vehicles and legislation, has there been a review of what's on our books to see if there are impediments to bringing?
That's a great question. So, and the question for those of you who didn't hear it is, are there any regulatory hurdles that we could remove to accelerate the adoption and maybe bring some manufacturing of autonomous vehicles here? So I called Google and I called Tesla, and I asked them that question. And they both said, not that we're aware of. And I said, well, is there anything that we could do proactively to encourage you to come here? We'd love for North Carolina to be ahead of the curve. And they said, well, there's one thing you could do, and that's expand tax credits to this area and basically financially incentivize us to come and do this. All right, well, that ain't going to happen. All right, maybe we should do that, but just a political reading of the current situation in Raleigh, forget it. Those guys hate financial incentives, even when it's clear that for every dollar we spend on that, we make 2 or 3 in return. They're just ideologically opposed to it, and I can't bring them around for the most part. And they also warned me. They said, we had a lawmaker try and do this very same thing last year from a state up north. They conducted a review of their laws for the purpose of determining if there were any hurdles there. And they decided, hey, as long as we're doing this, let's go ahead and kind of regulate this industry to provide some predictability. And in the process, they erected all of these hurdles. So what Google and Tesla told me is, no, y'all are probably fine, and just be quiet. They said, we're in these other states right now for specific reasons because we're doing testing there, and there are certain geographic features, geographic variety that we want for testing our vehicles. We're not avoiding North Carolina for any regulatory reasons right now. And it's a real danger that if I were to come to these guys and say, hey, let's make it better for driverless cars, that the opposite would occur. I mean, we saw what happened with Tesla. I mean, we basically declared war on Tesla as a state a few years ago, and we've walked that back to a certain extent. But still, Tesla is not allowed to have a showroom. Have you all been down Independence and seen that Tesla that's been empty? It's got weeds growing in it. It's been empty for like a year. I remember when I saw that sign pop up, I was excited. This is great. I want millennials in Charlotte to see that we have a Tesla showroom. That costs the city nothing, but helps our brand, adds value to being in Charlotte. It's a beacon that we are future thinking. Well, they shut down the showroom. The state of North Carolina said, no, you can't do that. And just a showroom, all right? They don't even sell the cars there. All the cars are sold online. They come, I think, out of California. So that's where we are right now politically with this issue. Denial. I would say we're in a state of denial about this.
Yes, sir.
Are there any political issues going on right now that are related to both technology and entertainment going on?
What was the second one?
Entertainment.
Well, there is one issue happening right now that touches on both technology companies that we might be able to recruit and entertainers that we're trying to have come and visit North Carolina. I don't know if that was what your question was directed at, but it's honestly the only thing, HB2 is the only thing I can think of that ties those two things together. So that's, and we might as well talk about HB2. I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't think it's going to be good. We're going to be in session for maybe another 2 or 3 days. There's a chance that we're going to end tomorrow. I'm getting in my car and I'm driving. I was in Raleigh yesterday. I'm driving back there as soon as I'm done here. And there was some question of passing an HB2 modification bill. The bill wasn't actually filed. We saw a leak of it. The version that we saw leaked was version 24. So they've been working on this behind closed doors for months. And the net effect is basically zero. And I don't know if you saw the papers, the NBA came out and said, we don't endorse this. And a big reason why the Republicans were even considering doing anything to HB2 is because they wanted to keep the NBA. They were concerned about the All-Star game departing, as well they should be. So now that the All-Star game and the NBA has said, no, we don't like what you're trying to do here, it's not enough, now I'm wondering whether they're even going to bring their little bill, their little modification bill up for a vote. Because a lot of Republicans don't want to change any word of HB2. They're getting a lot of resistance in their own caucus from changing any word of HB2. And just to be clear, that bill is an economic disaster for our state. It has cost just Mecklenburg hundreds of millions of dollars. That's coming from the Charlotte Chamber. So you know that's a real number. That's not a Jeff political number. That's the Charlotte Chamber. If the NBA All-Star game departs, that's $100 million, and that's the beginning of your problems at that point. It's full-fledged economic disaster.
Do you have a number? I know there's redistribution of a lot of our economic effect here. So with one of the tax credit, or with the tax redistribution that happened a while back.
Yep.
So is there any number how much that is affecting these rural communities that don't think it affects them, but now they're not getting our economic redistribution?
There is not a number for that yet, because I don't think we've had enough time. It's been about 100 days. So I guess there are probably some very rough estimates that have been done, but nothing that I can report to you with any real level of credibility. Do I know how much HB2 has hurt Pasquotank County or Transylvania County? I do not. And frankly, those are some of the counties that are going to be heavily in support of this legislation.
Yes.
So on the area of globalization, you said North Carolina has not been ahead of the curve in terms of thinking about the impact. Are there any states that have been a model that we should look to that have been good examples of thinking about globalization and how they position their particular state?
That's a really good question. One of the states that comes to mind, and there might be 5 states that do it better than this one, but this is the one that comes to mind, is Oregon. Now, Oregon decided to create what they call an export culture. Your main exporters are your super big businesses because they have the capital to basically go in and discover foreign markets. What Oregon decided was we're going to make sure that small businesses have access to these foreign markets. We're going to take a proactive approach. Most states, like North Carolina, the help that you get, if you own a small business in North Carolina, the help that you get to learn how to export from your state is this website. And you can go to the website, and I don't know what happens then. Right? But what Oregon did was take a more proactive approach towards small businesses, which is what I think we need to do. I mean, we could staff a call center and start calling small businesses, and a couple $100,000 a year to contact thousands and thousands and thousands of small businesses and say, how can we help link you up to the export pipeline? Whatever you make, I want to sell it in Denmark. And we got somebody in Denmark who understands. Will you have a conversation with that person? That's a proactive approach that creates an export culture.
Yes.
What is the state's role, if any, in balancing the first trend of autonomous vehicles, trucking specific, with the third trend of us being a logistics hub and 300 trucking companies?
That's a really good question because clearly there's a conflict. So the question was, we've got this rise of autonomous vehicles and trucking is going to be probably the first major industry to pick that up and adopt that. Well, how do we marry that with the fact that one of Charlotte's bright spots is the trucking industry? Right? We got 320 trucking companies. 7 of the top 10 trucking companies in the nation, I think, have headquarters here or major operations here. And the answer is I don't know. I think it's just going to be what it's going to be. I don't think state government is big enough to divert those rivers. I think they're going to crash together.
Is there a strong truck driving union that's protecting their interests?
Well, I mean, yes. You've got a union in that space. Now, North Carolina, as you all know, most of you know, is a right-to-work state, so we don't really have much of a union presence. But there are some unions that do operate here. Are unions going to be strong enough to really put the brakes on this trend? I don't think so.
Yes, sir.
There's another technology that might even dwarf the subjects that you talked about, and that's AI, as far as job loss.
Right.
And I'm wondering if there's been any consideration or discussion on that, because I mean, especially like you said, it's a banking town, a lot of high-paying jobs. There's people right now that are very smart at what they do, that their goal is, for people that are on the phone, They want to make it so that people will never feel uncomfortable enough to zero out of a conversation.
Yeah.
And that, if you think about how many people you talk to on the phone that get paid on the other line.
So there are 100 million people globally who work at call centers. 100 million, this is an enormous number. All of those jobs are expected to be gone in the next 10 to 15 years. All right, so that's 100 million people. I mean, if I had added a fourth section, it probably would have been AI, except that's still a little, that's fuzzier than autonomous
It'll happen
vehicles.
faster than the other ones.
And it may.
It's already happening now.
And it may, yeah. And as far as robotics, we have this, so far, robotics has been low skill. Robots are there to do things that are physically exhausting or dangerous or repetitive. But this cognitive robotics thing, and folks who have something to do with software engineering should know more about this than I do, could change that. And then I don't know what happens. Nobody knows what happens.
Yes.
Hi, just want to say again, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for bringing these very important issues to the forefront and creating awareness. I'm actually with Code for Charlotte, and we seek to better connect citizens with government through
Did I see
various
you
projects.
present at the competition? Were you one of the pitch
No, sir.
people who? Okay,
That was
somebody
not I.
Okay, all right.
Maybe I have a
Well, I'm
twin.
familiar with the organization.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much. So I want to know how can we get involved? How can we effectuate change in a meaningful way? Obviously, there's connecting with our representatives, but what are some projects that we can bring to bear to that goes with our mission of better connecting citizens with government? What can we do?
Well, we can start with every single government website, right? And go from there. So go ahead. I see you taking notes. Write down every government website. Yeah, the DMV website, we could probably upgrade there. Here's a specific project. We need to move to online voter registration. Lots and lots of states have this. South Carolina has this. Georgia has this. It's politically fraught only for terrible partisan reasons, because there's an anticipation that if you make it easier for people to register to vote, members of one party are going to slightly disproportionately register more often than the other. It's debatable whether or not that's even true, but trust me, that is the perception. That basically more young people with access to the internet will be registering to vote than they otherwise would, and the folks in charge would rather not have that occur right now. But eventually, we're going, hopefully within the next few years, we're going to move in the direction of online voter registration, which would be a wonderful project.
For your group to be involved.
Yes. I do have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Would it be possible for you to be a leader to your colleagues by getting an autonomous vehicle?
By buying an autonomous vehicle?
Somehow, some way, financing an autonomous vehicle.
Do you know what I make as a state senator?
I didn't say that you had to buy it. I just.
How else do you want me to get it now? Am I steal someone's driverless car? Oh, okay.
Crowdfunding.
All right.
Crowdfund.
Crowdfund this politician to get a car? Ooh. All right, we'll talk offline about this. Okay. Yes, sir.
Just on the retraining front, I agree with you completely on the retraining issue. And frankly, a lot of people displaced by globalism have not been retrained for other jobs, and that's affecting a lot of the political conversation this year. We've historically had a very hard time picking winners. I vividly remember 15 or 16 years ago we were going to retrain everybody for clean energy jobs. That hasn't really happened so much. Realistically, you're talking about a lot of job displacement. Start with the truckers, but continue with everybody else, and then the skilled workers. Other than the universal basic income thing that's suddenly become trendy recently, where we're not going to work at all, what are people going to do?
Right.
I don't know. I don't. All right. So I'm the politician who's going to look you in the eye and say, I don't know the answer, but that's the problem. So we need to start figuring it out together.
Yes.
So to that point, how do we bring the higher technology jobs that are more diverse than just banking? The engineers that are making the autonomous vehicles, that are designing the AI systems. How do we get those here from California, basically? Right. Is there incentives besides the tax incentives you talked about to help bring them here?
Financially, no. I think the tax incentive is pretty much it as far as direct financial incentive. Now, The other incentives are having a highly skilled workforce. And typically what you hear from businesses that you're trying to recruit, their number one concern isn't access to interstates or anything, or even tax incentives. Their number one concern is having a highly skilled workforce. So having a major investment in community colleges is important. Now, the type of job you're talking about, which I assume was high-tech jobs, is that what you said? And how can we incentivize those folks to come here? Well, you have to create a cluster. They want to be part of a community of tech firms. And we've got an opportunity to do that here in Charlotte with respect to financial technology. And boy, we had a really good prospect lined up that really could have had a catalytic effect in that region. And then we decided it would be better to give gay people a swift kick in a political year, so PayPal left. Getting PayPal would have really helped launch us in the fintech industry. I don't know a better answer other than to create a brand that says, this is what we do here. You will be among friends and colleagues who do what you do. It's to your benefit to be part of our community. And things like light rail are helpful for that. Things like light rail are a beacon to those folks because they want to ride mass transit. They don't necessarily want a car. I think the way that our uptown is going to look and operate in another 5 or 10 years is going to be a beacon to folks who live in San Francisco, want to be able to afford a decent amount of square footage, right, and not just be completely cramped for $5,000 a month. We're going to be a really good option for them. It's a seventh the cost to start a business in Charlotte as it is in San Francisco. Yes, sir.
With all that being said, and moving to the new and great advances and stuff, it seems like we're forgetting about what made the city kind of fun. Like we're building a lot of high rises, and like South End is now just becoming condos. All the cool things and places we had to hang out and live and enjoy life are being kind of displaced. Can you speak a little to that? Because it's just...
I don't think anybody can disagree with you. Are you from Charlotte originally? Are you a native?
I'm from that great state called South Carolina.
On the rusty roads, but I've been here since '98.
You know what I'm talking about with the roads then?
Yeah.
All right. I wasn't wrong.
When you go down Johnston Road, and as soon as you get out of Valentine, a block later the road changes. I am well aware. About a lot of times. All right.
All right, so you've been here for about 20 years. I mean, you've seen a lot of change to Charlotte.
I mean, but I've lived from Atlanta to D.C., New York to Miami, and I came here from D.C. And my first job here, lady said, well, you got to get up early because Charlotte traffic is crazy. I was like, I'm coming from D.C. Yeah. It's nothing, you know, but yeah, that report that, you know, it's 200 cities rated by State Farm, and Charlotte is like the top 50 of bad drivers. Yeah. I just don't go anywhere with a range. That's all.
Right, I agree. Well, look, we've got a good example to our south, that you just mentioned, not South Carolina, of some mistakes to avoid, right? Atlanta provided us with a lot of examples of what not to do, specifically with respect to transportation. And it was not all Atlanta's fault. The General Assembly in Georgia decided decades ago that they would contribute exactly $0 to mass transit in Atlanta. So as a result, mass transit didn't keep pace with population, so everybody moved to the suburbs, and now you have a permanent transportation nightmare. So we can't let that happen here. We're going to become the size that Atlanta is now in another 10 or 15 years, which means we have to make sure that we have roads and mass transit to accommodate them if we decide to go that direction. That would be great. That would be great. As many as possible. But just in terms of transportation funding, the whole state gets about $3 billion a year. About $1 billion of that comes from the federal government. About $1.5 billion comes from your gas tax. And we got another $500 million from various fees you get hit up for when you go to the DMV. So $3 billion a year for the whole state. Well, we could spend $2 billion a year just in Mecklenburg. We really could. I mean, remember I said the light rail extension line, that's $1 billion. And that's not all to the state of North Carolina or all to Charlotte. It's being spread, but that's an idea of how expensive these projects really are. The whole state only gets $3 billion. So there is virtually no chance at our current levels of investment to keep up with population growth when it comes to transportation. Something's got to give there. As to your original question, You know, this city is changing very quickly. There are things that we all like about it that we don't want to see go away. Things that have gone away that we liked, man, I don't have a good answer for that. Because as much as this city's changed in the last 10 years, I think the rate of change is accelerating. It's going to change more in the next 10 than it has in the last 10. All of this is going to look different. There's a plan to cover, you know, various sections of various interstates and just grow out uptown. I mean, this place could look real different. The Charlotte Airport is undergoing massive expansion. This place is going to look real. We got 12,000 apartments under construction. We got another 13,000 apartments in the pipeline. I don't know who's going to live in those apartments. I don't know. If they go belly up, no one's going to cry for the developers who decided to build out that quickly and that much. I don't have a good answer for your question. I wouldn't trust anybody who did either.
Yes, sir.
Maybe last question, we're probably getting long on time, but what are your aspirations as far as your career?
Well, I'm a captain in the National Guard. I would love to make Major one day. I think I've done a good job for him. I'm 33 years old. I've been in elected office for 2 years. What I've learned is I have an enormous amount to learn, and I'm really under no illusions that what North Carolina needs is like a 33-year-old governor or U.S. senator or anything like that. So if there is anything in if there's higher office in my future, I think it's probably 10 years away. Honestly, every day I walk into the General Assembly, it just feels like a huge honor to be there. As frustrating as it is, and it's deeply frustrating on a regular basis, the first emotion is just gratitude that I get to participate in this conversation and meet a bunch of really good people who are trying really hard to do the best for their constituents. I mean, those folks are everywhere in the General Assembly, even though we like to, you know, create this caricature of those folks, you know, whatever, don't know what they're doing. But a lot of them really do, and they really care. And the fact that I get to talk with those people and work with them on a daily basis is wonderful. And it completely fulfills any sense of ambition that I have right now.
What committee assignments do you have?
What committee assignments? Finance, Agriculture and Environment, Judiciary 2. We have a Judiciary 1 and a Judiciary 2. Information Technology, which does not meet that often, sadly. And when it does meet, we're not talking about anything that you guys would think we would talk about.
You probably don't get the communication, the announcement in time because of the communication.
Well, right. Someone hands me a note that says the Information Technology Committee will be meeting 15 minutes ago.
Someone may need a new chair.
You know what?
That'd be a good ambition.
No, I'm a Democrat. There's not a single Democrat chair or co-chair of any committee in the entire General Assembly, but maybe I'll change that. Yes?
Who else on the other side or on the Democratic side gets it? Who else does?
Well, there are a good handful of people who get it. I'll give you a Republican from here in Charlotte, Rob Bryan. He and I have had long conversations about, you know, this trend of autonomous vehicles, and he definitely understands that. Who else do we have? We've got Becky Carney, Representative Becky Carney here in Charlotte. She definitely gets it when it comes to displaced workers because she's been there long enough to see that happen before and see some of the mistakes that we made as state government. So she and I talk about that on a regular basis. But you know, there are political changes that need to occur in the General Assembly. There's also just a generational change that needs to occur. Part of the reason that hasn't occurred is because we've erected barriers between us and you deliberately to keep that from happening. First is gerrymandering. So 90% of us can't lose a general election. 90%. We can be openly incompetent or openly corrupt, but because we get to draw our own districts, or because, you know, the party in charge gets to draw all the districts, they can control the outcome of 90% of the elections, which is terrible, and it's something that my party did for decades, and we had the opportunity to change, and we didn't because we never thought that we would lose control, and then we did, and then these guys seized the power to gerrymander, and they took it to, we had an art, and they took it to a science, basically. So, I mean, you're dealing with 170 members of the General Assembly, 90% of whom only face a political risk from their right or their left if they're Republican or Democrat. They can only lose in a primary. So as soon as you get elected, everybody goes up there and it's a race to see how Republican or how Democrat you can be. And despite the fact that we can only lose in a primary, we're all up every 2 years. So we were all up for our primary this year. Of 170, you know how many of us lost a primary? 0. And that's the only way the vast majority of us can lose. And we've done that on purpose to keep as many people out as possible. Anybody know what the salary is for a General Assembly? I heard 14. I would love for it to be 14. It's 13.9. I'd love to get that extra $100. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not out there complaining about my pay or anything, but part of the reason why it's that low is because if they made it something that the normal person could raise a family on, you'd have a lot more people running for office. There are a lot of really good 45-year-olds who would love to run and take part in the citizen legislature that we say we have that are effectively barred from doing that because we keep the salary so low.
Well, it's a part-time job, right?
Of course it is. That's right. I've spent all week in Charlotte, or all week in Raleigh, and There be there on Saturday, but yes. I mean, it is technically because we only meet for like 6 months in 1 year and then 3 months another year. So, but there needs to be something that allows middle-income people to serve. We got some people who are pre-career. We got almost everybody who's post-career. We got basically nobody in their prime. That's who we need. That's what we're missing. People who could be making $200,000, but instead will take a 75% pay cut to work with us. They just can't take an 85% pay cut. Yes?
You mentioned Oregon having some good policies. Do we have any states that either side of the political spectrum is looking at saying we should do what they're doing? Like, do we have any states who we say they're doing really well and we're going to do some of those policies? Or, like you said about Atlanta, we're going to avoid those transportation policies?
Well, I can tell you is there isn't one model state that we're really pursuing. Almost every major bill that we pass, there's usually a section in the sponsor's speech about it where he or she will say, and they've done this successfully in these 5 states. I can tell you it's always a red flag when somebody points out that we're the only state that's doing something or we're the only state that's not doing something. I'll give you an example. So the age for juvenile crime in North Carolina is it maxes out at 16. So we prosecute 16-year-olds as 16 and 17-year-olds as adults in North Carolina. We're the only state in the country that does that. Every other state has bumped it up to 18. They're not putting 16-year-olds in prison with 50-year-old men, right? Even South Carolina is way ahead of us there. So, yeah. All right, we'll take the last question. Sorry. Yes.
No last question. I was just putting it there.
Oh, okay, Erica.
We can take one more question and then we're going to wrap up. So, if anybody else.
Yes, ma'am.
What happened with the light rail funding cap in the short session? Did that get?
No, it's still there. So basically what the General Assembly did is kill light rail, right? Because light rail has to be, its costs are so high that you have to spread them around. And basically the General Assembly said, we're not going to give you enough money to be able to afford light rail to Wake County, because Wake County was next up on light rail. So this light rail project would not be happening if the current folks had been in charge a few years earlier. Wake County probably needs light rail, and now it's not going to happen. On that sunny note, thank you all for coming. I appreciate your time.